And that same day, USAID's top 58 managers were given 45 minutes to get out.
12 days ago, people knew where their next paycheck was coming from. They knew how they were going to pay for their kids' daycare. All gone.
So we got to give you an update on USAID because tonight, 60 Minutes, which is of course operated by CBS News, ran an entire special with the fired USAID workers, right? These are people who recently got canned by Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. USAID, of course, is that infamous agency that got caught spending millions of dollars on things like DEI in Serbia and Sesame Street in Iraq. And yes, both of those things are actual programs that the USAID was funding and promoting. Now, what CBS News tried to do tonight is essentially emotional propaganda, right? They interview these disgruntled former fired employees, and they're basically trying to say, look, don't you feel so bad for them? They're such great, amazing people. What Trump is doing is so cruel. Look at all the people he is putting out of work. And of course, to do so, who do they interview? They interview the former employees of USAID as well as a couple of Democrat senators. So very great reporting and very great balance, of course, we're getting on CBS News, such equal diversity of opinions that they are representing. And of course, it wouldn't really matter, right? Normally under free speech, you would be totally fine to interview whoever you want, run as biased a story as you want. But I do want you to remember the legal situation that 60 Minutes and CBS News are in. Of course, they are currently facing a lawsuit from Trump for deceptively editing the Kamala Harris interview back in the 2024 campaign. And again, that normally would be fine. They would have the right to do that if not for the fact, and this is very important, that CBS News operates under a public broadcasting license, right? They're not a normal private cable network that has the right to say whatever it wants. Part of the contract that CBS News has with the federal government is actually that they're required to serve the public interest, right? They're actually not allowed to be biased. They have to represent both sides. And so I just want you to take in the 60 Minutes interview as maybe another example as to why the FCC should absolutely strip the broadcasting rights, at least the public broadcasting rights of CBS News. And again, maybe another reminder as to why they are currently in a very sticky legal situation when it comes to some of these lawsuits. But nonetheless, we're going to get into this today because this, I kid you not, is one of the most ridiculous 60 Minutes segments I think I've ever seen. This might actually be worse than the Kamala Harris interview back in 2024. But folks, if you enjoy the content, please do us a big favor. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel, okay? That's the best way to support our work. And remember, we are not funded by USAID. I can promise you that. We're not taking programs to promote DEI in Serbia. And with that said, I think it's important to start here, okay? As you are about to hear all of this propaganda trying to tug on the heartstrings of the American people over these USAID workers, let's remember what USAID was doing and some of the fundamental reasons why the Trump administration saw it fit to shut down this very corrupt and subversive government agency. So this is USAID for you.
And I would just say a strong message to Democrats who are out there pretending to be outraged about the long list of crap that this administration is cutting, federal waste and funding, like $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt, $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. I could go on, and I'm happy to provide this list to every single one of you. Democrats are outraged that the American people want to be, they want their taxpayers going to good uses, not stuff like this. But then they're very quiet about the fact that there are still North Carolinians and people in California who have lost everything. And in the last 4 years, this federal government did nothing to help them. This president will continue to put Americans first. And I think the successes of this week so far speak to that, and it's only Wednesday. So I'll see you guys later this week, and we'll see you this afternoon.
Right, so let's not forget, this is what CBS News and the Democrat Party are struggling so hard to defend. And here's an important point I don't want people to miss. It's very easy to hear things like that and write off the USAID spending as wasteful, right? They're just wasting a bunch of taxpayer dollars. But I wish that was all it was. No, what is going on here, firstly, is corruption. In many cases, we are probably finding that there's a lot of these NGOs that USAID is sending money to that have some conflicts of interest. For instance, Politico, right? Politico, the very major news outlet that we are told is part of the free and fair press, was literally taking money subsidized by the US government. So in that sense, we literally have state-run propaganda media in this country. You'd have to imagine there's a lot of relationships between maybe some of these politicians and USAID. It was recently revealed, for instance, that one of the activist judges who is trying to harass the Trump administration right now in the federal judiciary, well, his wife is literally taking active USAID grants, or at least was before the Trump administration shut it down. So, of course, a lot of government corruption going on, but I would argue it is even deeper than that, because you also have this very sinister and destructive and dangerous agenda of nation building around the world happening at USAID. And I take a look at something like the Sesame Street show in Iraq, which again, on the surface sounds like a waste of money. That's all it sounds like. It's stupid. Why is America funding this? But we actually, on this channel, reacted to a clip of a Democrat senator who was talking about that Sesame Street show in Iraq. And his core argument was basically, no, actually, USAID needs to fund it, right? He was actually defending the government paying for Sesame Street in Iraq, because what he said it was doing was, well, it's pushing American values to the children of Iraq. And if you don't fund the Sesame Street show, the children in the Middle East are going to grow up to be terrorists. To which I say, what? Do you even hear yourself? That's why I say, again, a corrupt, sinister agenda of nation building, and it is actively destructive. Why? Because as it turns out, the types of things like that USAID are doing are actually breeding active resentment to America by the people of the rest of the world, right? You wonder why people in the Middle East hate America so much. A newsflash, it's not only just because of freedom and the Constitution or something. It's also because we are going into their societies through the wars and also through the cultural imperialism like this, right? And basically telling very traditional, very Islamic societies how to run their business. And guess what? When you push values like that, when you force that type of stuff onto people in a nation like Iraq or Afghanistan, guess what? They're not going to like it, right? There's going to be resentment that is bred. So, again, something like Sesame Street in Iraq, don't just view it as wasteful. View it as, no, actually, what they are doing is completely dangerous, because they may actually be creating future terrorists. Because, again, you take these like very radical traditional Islamic societies and you're like, here is Western cultural liberalism. Shove this down your throats. How do you think they feel about that? Okay, so just another reason why, again, USAID was not just about cutting waste. It was about cutting down corruption and a sinister globalist agenda of nation building. But with that said, okay, now that we fully understand why cutting down this agency was so important, let's now get into the 60 Minutes show. And just to give you an example, here is the type of propaganda they were pushing to try to make you feel so bad for these fired USAID workers. And I have to say, I'm not sure it worked that well. They kind of just embarrassed themselves.
Doge arrived at USAID January 27th, and that same day, USAID's top 58 managers were given 45 minutes to get out.
They're the best professionals I've had the privilege to work with.
I mean, really? Am I supposed to hear that and feel bad for these people? No, that's awesome. Okay, Doge went in and was like, 45 minutes, get out, you destructive, sinister, globalist, fill in the blank, okay? No, that's amazing. Okay, that is the Department of Government Efficiency working very efficiently to cut down on the size of our government. I don't understand the sympathy that's supposed to be drawn up. I mean, that's hilarious, that's funny, and it's also extremely awesome. But nonetheless, here is some of the other type of propaganda you heard tonight in the 60 Minutes interview. Basically, again, trying to make people feel so bad for these fired USAID workers. And you have this quote right here from one of those former employees, right? 12 days ago, people knew where their next paycheck was coming from. They knew how they were going to pay for their kids' daycare, their medical bills, and then they were all gone overnight. Oh no, our livelihoods as workers in this country are so screwed. Okay, well, there's a little bit more to the story than that, but first of all, take a listen.
People are really scared. I think that 12 days ago, people knew where their next paycheck was coming from. They knew how they were going to pay for their kids' daycare, their medical bills, and then all gone overnight.
Oh no, they're no longer going to be able to make a living by stealing money from the American taxpayer. Don't we all feel so bad for these people? Oh my gosh, play me the world's tiniest violin. Here's the thing. Yeah, on a human level, it kind of sucks whenever anyone loses their job, gets laid off, get furloughed. But guess what? You know where that happens all the time for ordinary Americans? The private sector. Okay, most Americans at some point in their lives, if they work long enough and they work like a career job where they're an employee, yeah, at some point you're going to get canned, you're going to get a pay cut, you're going to get laid off, etc. Like these types of things happen. They're not exclusive to the federal government, but these federal employees obviously work in a structure, in a work structure that is so protected, right? Usually for a very long time, the standard has been you cannot fire a civil servant under any circumstances. And so basically these people expect that they're going to work for life. And suddenly they're getting the reality check of how most Americans in this country have to live, where actually you can be fired or laid off from your job. Yeah, again, play me the world's tiniest violin. But it actually gets a lot worse than that, because here you have Elon Musk in response to this very clip. He points out here that 60 Minutes are such liars. As the community note states, all employees, as you know, were offered 8 months of pay and benefits. That is right. You may remember this. We talked about this a lot. The Trump administration offered a federal buyout to all of the workers, giving them 8 months of free pay and benefits while they tried to go on and find another job. Now, with that said, let's relate that to the private sector before you try to feel too bad for these people. Okay, so any of you guys who ever got laid off or fired from a job, or you just know how your employment contract works, you would know, again, in the private world, it is usually a 2 weeks notice, right? That's kind of the most you get if you're lucky. You get 2 weeks of being paid still for your job, and that's all the time you have to figure out the rest of your life, go and find another job, etc. 2 weeks. Sometimes if you work a good job or you're lucky, depending on how it works, sometimes you can have a 30-day period of severance pay. Maybe if you work a really good job, you do something really important, you can get 60 days, even 90 days of severance pay. And that's usually for jobs where you're making a lot of money to begin with. But still, I want to ask someone the genuine question here. Any of you guys, have you ever worked at a job where if you got laid off, you had 8 entire months, almost an entire year of severance pay? That is completely unheard of. That is insane. Okay? And the fact that this is what the federal employees are crying about really does show you how out of touch they are with like the standard of what regular working people have to deal with, right? The entitled brats that these people are, because these people are literally running to the mainstream media crying about the fact that, oh no, I'm only going to be paid for the next 8 months while I can try to find another job. Again, that's why I don't feel bad for these people. Okay? They're actually still, even in firing, even being cut in disgrace, are still honestly living a lot better lives than the rest of us. Okay, I'm just gonna point that out right here. But we go on to some of the other nonsense that was spewed, of course, in this interview. For instance, this former administrator of USAID, which they tried to note was a Republican. He was a Republican under the Bush years. And see, that exactly proves that the GOP are such massive hypocrites, because they clearly just don't understand how politics has changed in our time. Okay, I think that's honestly further proof that USAID was a nonsense, destructive, again, subversive agency. But anyways, he responded to the claim that USAID was rife with fraud by saying that was utter nonsense. This guy goes on to say that USAID is the most accountable aid agency in the world. Guys, they were just so transparent. They were holding everyone so accountable, just so amazing. Everyone should strive to be just like USAID. Of course, hilariously, we'll talk about that. We'll address that claim in a second. But I want to point out, this guy right here directly contradicted himself about 20 seconds later in the interview, and I'm not even making that up. Take a listen.
The most accountable aid agency in the world is USAID.
Natsios told us there is waste and occasional fraud like any big agency. Think of the Pentagon. But the money, he says, is watched.
So we're the most accountable agency in the world, but yeah, there's some fraud. Compare it to the Pentagon. That's the comparison you're gonna make? Are you freaking serious? The Pentagon, notoriously the most wasteful, fraudulent agency or government bureaucracy on earth. That's your gold standard of like, well, we're just like the Okay, if you're just like the Pentagon, then clearly you are ripe with waste, abuse, and fraud. I'm just saying. But also on the point of accountability, in the point of transparency, I want to point out here that actually USAID is so lacking in transparency that even when Doge tried to go in and just ask for basic information, USAID refused to give it to them. So let's kind of remind ourselves of that aspect of the story. Well, what was going on was the Trump administration was saying, hey, USAID, can we see what you are doing? We need to kind of have information here. And USAID very notoriously refused to give them that information. But now they're running around claiming, oh, we're so accountable. Oh, really? Well, the president of the United States is your boss, right? You're an executive agency. And yet this is what they were up to. Again, most accountable in the world. Really? Take a listen. Here's Marco Rubio.
The issue, as I said, is yeah, there are things that USAID, that we do through USAID that we should continue to do, and we will continue to do. But everything they do has to be in alignment with the national interest and the foreign policy of the United States. And the attitude that USAID has adopted over the years is, no, we are independent of the national interest. We fund programs irrespective of whether it's aligned or not aligned with the foreign policy. That's ridiculous. These are taxpayer dollars. Every penny that we spend in foreign aid needs to be in furtherance and aligned with the national interest and the foreign policy of the United States. So this is not about ending the programs that USAID does per se. There are things that it does that are good, and there are things that it does that we have strong questions about. It's about the way it operates as an entity. And they're supposed to take direction from the State Department, policy direction. They do not. Not only do they not take policy direction, they're completely uncooperative. When you ask questions, when you try to go in and find out, okay, what does this program do? Who's getting the money? Why was this funded? Why are we doing this? Why aren't you coordinating with the embassy or the State Department? Their attitude is, we don't have to answer to you because we are independent. We answer to no one. Well, that's not true, and that will...
So again, just remember, guys, the most accountable and transparent agency on earth, and yet they refuse to tell anyone what they're doing. They refuse to answer to executive oversight or congressional oversight or anyone's oversight. They think they're a rogue agency that is above all accountability. And on top of that, as he points out, and as I kind of hinted at earlier, a lot of things they are funding and actively pursuing are against the current agenda and interests of the president, of the State Department, of Congress, and of course the American people. But of course, we're supposed to sit here and believe most transparent agency ever. Yeah.
In a democracy, we rely upon transparency. We rely upon accountability of our officials.
Yeah, well, clearly not. Okay, like that's just laughable. This is literally the exact opposite thing is happening. And again, if you believe in accountability, if you believe in transparency, why did you refuse to turn over your information to the president of the United States? You're an executive agency. You work for the president. Doesn't really check out, does it?
That USAID employee told us they didn't know if the Doge engineer entered those spaces. But the employee said that is the problem with all of this.
So you see exactly what's going on here. They claim they're accountable, but they're only accountable to themselves. Okay, well, you have another person in this interview that tried to argue, well, you know, USAID, we are transparent because we have our own accountants and we have our own lawyers. Therefore, we're transparent. They work within USAID. Their agenda is to protect USAID. No, you're not accountable to the people. You're not transparent with the president, with Congress, with the State Department. It goes on and on. But anyways, I think by this point, hopefully we've established that USAID is a rogue government agency with no transparency and accountability, which is exactly why it was so important to get rid of about 13,000 of those 14,000 employees and more or less basically shut down the agency. But of course, what is the next argument that we heard tonight on 60 Minutes? Well, it was that why are the Republicans so obsessed with USAID when they only comprise 1% of the federal budget? You know, we're not even spending a lot of money. That's a silly argument, but take a listen.
USAID spending in 2023 was $38 billion. That's less than 1% of the federal budget.
Yeah, what on earth kind of argument is that? First of all, I don't care if it was 1% of the federal budget or less than 1%. The point is the Department of Government Efficiency, right? We're trying to root out inefficiencies and frauds and corrupt things. So it doesn't matter if the corruption is small scale, okay? It adds up. you act as if USAID is the only agency that DOJ audited. No, they basically looked at every single executive and, administrative agency within our government. And it's not exactly like we are so obsessed with USAID. It's actually the Democrats who are so obsessed with USAID because of all of the different agencies that we looked at. Notice how the one they were the most freaked out about, the one they were protesting the most to protect, was not even like the Department of Education. It was, of course, what? USAID. They really made a big deal out of that one, which to me, of course, suggests that there probably is a vested interest in that. I don't know. I'm just saying. But nonetheless, okay, again, it doesn't matter. We're trying to cut down waste. And if you're going to get rid of waste, you got to start 1% at a time. So that's just really stupid. All right, moving on to their next argument. We keep on going here. Well, now that same guy, that Republican administrator of USAID, here you go. President Trump says he has the authority to shut down USAID, but the Republican Andrew Natsios, funny name by the way, Natsios, a former USAID administrator, says he most definitely does not have the authority to shut down USAID. Source, of course, is Trust Me, Bro.
The president says he has the authority to shut down an independent agency like USAID.
He most definitely does not.
Okay, well, first of all, who is this guy? He's not a lawyer. He's not a judge. He's a former worker of USAID, but he said that. Everyone has to believe him. I also want to point out, guys, you actually look at the history here. USAID was created in 1961 through an executive order issued by President John F. Kennedy. So if it was created by an executive order, I would venture to guess it probably can be eliminated by an executive order. But, nonetheless, there you have it. Okay, there was a brief summary of the ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous 60-minute segment that they ran on USAID. And just to really quickly recap what we talked about in today's video. First of all, they said, oh no, they're without a paycheck. They're only going to have free severance pay for 8 months. We all feel so sorry for them. Do you feel sorry for them, average American? That was number one. They said they were accountable to the people and to the government, despite the fact that there is rampant evidence to the contrary. And when we asked them for accountability, they literally they shut their doors. They refused to give us anything. And then you basically almost had to go in by force to take it. Yeah. Kind of not really the strongest argument there. And of course, they are claiming that, we're so essential to the operations of the U.S. government and, what we're doing. No. First of all, you guys are funneling money, number one, to a lot of corruption, and number two, to a lot of destructive nation building that actively puts Americans in harm's way. Okay. So, but anyways, there you have it. I'm sure this is far from the last we're going to see about this. They are going to rampantly be trying to drum up all the sympathy for these federal workers who they're losing their jobs. Normal people lose their jobs every day, and they're only going to have 8 months of pay. Feel so sorry. My gosh. Be sure to like and subscribe, by the way, guys. All right, with that said, let me know your thoughts, and until next time, God bless and peace.